The crowd was buzzing with whispers and clicks of camera shutters as Donald Trump walked onto the stage at a packed charity gala in New York. He was calm, composed, and sporting his signature red tie that seemed to gleam under the bright chandeliers. The atmosphere was electrified, filled with both supporters and skeptics, each waiting for their moment to cheer or jeer. This wasn't just another event, it was a stage for the unexpected. And tonight, something was about to unfold that no one would forget. As Donald began to speak, a sharp voice cut through the applause. "Mr. Trump," a young reporter standing near the front row, interrupted loudly. Her tone was biting, her eyes narrowed with determination. "How does it feel to attend a charity event when you've made billions off the backs of struggling Americans?" The room fell silent. Even the most vocal critics in the crowd looked taken aback by the sheer audacity of her words. For a moment, Donald stood still, his expression unreadable. The audience was frozen, their eyes darting between Trump and the reporter, waiting for his reaction. Would he lash out? Ignore her? But then, something unexpected happened. He smiled, not his usual smug grin, but a calm, measured smile that threw everyone off guard. "Well," Trump began, his voice steady but carrying a hint of amusement, "I didn't realize tonight's charity gala was doubling as a debate." A ripple of laughter swept through the room, but the reporter wasn't done. She stepped forward, her microphone trembling slightly in her hand. "I'm not here to laugh, Mr. Trump," she shot back. "I'm here for the truth. Aren't you the one responsible for the same inequalities this charity is trying to fix?" The tension in the room thickened. Trump's supporters were visibly agitated, while his critics looked thrilled, as if she was saying what they had always wanted to. But instead of retaliating, Trump paused and gestured toward the back of the room. "I'll answer your question," he said firmly, "but let's make this interesting." Before anyone could process what he meant, Trump walked off the stage straight into the crowd. People scrambled to move aside as he approached a table in the back corner, where a frail elderly man sat quietly, wearing a worn-out jacket and nervously clutching his cane. No one had noticed him before now. "Sir," Trump said, his voice suddenly softer, "would you mind standing up for a moment?" The man hesitated, clearly unsure of what was happening, but Trump extended a hand, helping him to his feet. "Everyone," Trump said, turning to the crowd, "this is Mr. Harold Jacobs. He worked as a janitor for 35 years and never asked anyone for a handout. Tonight, he's my guest of honor." The audience gasped, and the reporter's confident smirk faltered for the first time. Trump turned back to her, his tone now sharp but controlled. "You accuse me of profiting off inequality, but let me ask you something. When was the last time you invited someone like Mr. Jacobs to sit at your table?" The room was dead silent, every eye now on the reporter. She looked stunned, her confidence evaporating as Trump continued. "It's easy to point fingers and play the hero with a microphone, but real change starts when you stop talking and start doing." The crowd erupted into applause, and even some of Trump's harshest critics couldn't help but nod. The reporter stood frozen, unable to respond. Trump, however, wasn't done yet. "And by the way," he added with a smirk, "I'll be matching every dollar raised tonight with my own money, because actions, my dear, speak louder than words." The audience roared as Trump turned back to the elderly man and whispered something to him, which made the man smile and nod. No one could hear what was said, but it didn't matter. The room was buzzing with energy, and Trump walked back to the stage, leaving everyone, including the reporter, speechless. The applause was deafening, but the tension in the air hadn't completely faded. The reporter stood frozen, her confidence shaken, while Trump returned to the stage. He adjusted the microphone casually, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. "Now where were we?" he said with a small chuckle, his eyes scanning the room. But instead of continuing with his speech, Trump turned back to the crowd. "You see, this isn't just about making a statement or winning a debate. It's about recognizing people like Mr. Jacobs, who remind us what resilience truly looks like. It's about action, not accusations." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. The audience was hanging on every word now. Even those who had walked in skeptical couldn't deny that Trump had managed to shift the narrative completely. He gestured toward the elderly man again. "Tonight we celebrate people like him, the unsung heroes. And if that reporter over there, or anyone else, wants to criticize me for that, they're welcome to. But I'll keep doing what I do best, turning criticism into results. A mixture of cheers and applause erupted from the crowd, the energy in the room now electric. The reporter, visibly flustered, quickly sat down, her microphone lowered. Trump leaned into the microphone one last time, his voice steady and commanding. But remember, he said, looking directly at the cameras now, we can't make a difference unless we do it together. Then with a sly smile he added, and while we're at it, if you've enjoyed tonight and want to see more moments like these, go ahead and hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter. Together, we can keep the conversation going. As the crowd erupted into applause again, the camera zoomed in on Trump, who gave a subtle wave before stepping off the stage. It wasn't just another charity event anymore. It was a moment no one would forget. As Trump stepped off the stage, the crowd slowly began to settle, but whispers buzzed across the room. The bold move he had just made left everyone curious. What was his real reason for calling out the reporter like that? It wasn't like him to back down from a fight, but the way he shifted the focus to the elderly man felt deliberate, almost calculated. Meanwhile, the reporter, still seated in the front row, clenched her microphone tightly. Her face was a mix of frustration and disbelief. She leaned toward her colleague sitting beside her, whispering, "That was a stunt." "He's playing the crowd." Her colleague shrugged, hesitant to agree. "Maybe," he said softly, "but it worked." "Did you see the reaction?" He turned the whole room around. Trump, now at the back of the room, approached Mr. Jacobs once more. This time the cameras weren't rolling, but a few curious guests turned to watch. "Harold," Trump said quietly, placing a hand on the man's shoulder, "I meant what I said up there. You're an inspiration, and I want to make sure you get the recognition you deserve." The elderly man looked up, his hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Trump, I don't know what to say. I'm just an old man trying to get by. I'm not special." Trump crouched down, meeting him at eye level. "You're wrong," he said firmly, but with warmth in his tone. "You worked hard your whole life. You didn't ask for a handout, and you didn't give up, no matter how tough things got. That makes you more special than you realize." As the conversation continued, a waiter standing nearby couldn't help but listen. His eyes darted nervously between Trump and the elderly man, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the courage. Trump noticed and turned his attention to the young man. "You look like you've got something on your mind," he said, his voice inviting but sharp enough to demand honesty. The waiter froze, his hands gripping the tray he was holding. No, sir. I was just—" "Spit it out," Trump said, cutting him off, though not unkindly. "What's your name?" The waiter swallowed hard. "Carlos," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was just thinking, what you did up there, it was, impressive. Most people wouldn't have done that." Trump's gaze softened slightly. "Carlos, most people don't take the time to notice what's right in front of them. The question is, do you?" Carlos blinked, caught off guard by the question. Before he could respond, Trump straightened up and looked around the room, addressing no one in particular but loud enough for others to hear. "Sometimes the people who seem invisible are the ones holding everything together, and yet we ignore them. That's the real problem." The room quieted once more and Carlos stood frozen, unsure what to do next. Trump turned back to Mr. Jacobs, pulling out a card from his pocket. "Here," he said, handing it to him. "Call this number tomorrow. I want to make sure you're taken care of properly." Jacob stared at the card, his eyes filling with tears. "Mr. Trump, I don't know how to thank you." Trump gave a small smile. "You already have, Harold. Just keep being you." As Trump began to walk away, the whispers in the crowd grew louder. Guests were already pulling out their phones, tweeting and posting about what they had just witnessed. The reporter who had challenged him earlier sat quietly, her confidence now replaced with something else, curiosity. But deep down, a question lingered in everyone's mind. What was Trump's real plan? Why did he single out Harold Jacobs? And what did he mean by taking care of him? The night wasn't over, and something told them there was more to this story than met the eye. As the crowd slowly dispersed to mingle and enjoy the rest of the evening, the whispers and speculation about Trump's actions only grew louder. Carlos, the waiter, couldn't shake the feeling that something big was happening. He wasn't sure what it was, but the way Trump had addressed him and the way he had spoken to Mr. Jacobs felt purposeful. It was as if every word Trump said had layers of meaning, like he was setting something up that no one could see yet. Back at his table, the reporter sat with her notebook open, scribbling furiously. She wasn't just writing about the events of the night, she was piecing together a story, trying to connect dots that didn't yet exist. Her instincts told her there was more to this than a simple show of generosity. "He doesn't do anything without a reason," she muttered to herself, her pen tapping against the table. "What's his angle?" Meanwhile, Trump slipped quietly into a side room, away from the crowd. His phone buzzed in his pocket and he glanced at the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. The text read, "Everything is ready. Just say the word." Trump smirked slightly, typing back a quick response. "Not yet. Let them stew a little longer." He leaned back in the chair, his mind racing. Tonight wasn't just about Harold Jacobs or the reporter's confrontation. It was a carefully crafted move in a much larger plan. Trump knew the power of perception, and he had just planted the seeds of curiosity and speculation. Now all he had to do was wait for the story to grow. Back in the main hall, Harold Jacobs sat quietly, still clutching the card Trump had given him. He had no idea what was on the other side of that number, but for the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope. Carlos, who had been watching from a distance, finally worked up the courage to approach him. "Hey, Mr. Jacobs," he said hesitantly, sitting down next to the elderly man. "That was something, huh?" Jacob chuckled softly, his hands trembling slightly as he placed the card carefully in his jacket pocket. "I don't know what just happened, son," he admitted, "but I think my life might have just changed." Carlos nodded, his eyes darting around the room. "Do you think he really meant it? About helping you, I mean?" Jacobs looked at him, a mixture of hope and caution in his eyes. "I've learned not to expect too much in this world, but there was something in his voice. Something real. I think he meant it." Across the room, the reporter was still watching, her sharp eyes trained on Jacobs and Carlos. She could feel the story building, but there were still too many pieces missing. Who was Harold Jacobs to Trump? Why had he been chosen out of everyone in the room? And what was Trump planning? The buzz of the crowd grew louder as people began sharing their own theories. Some believed it was all a publicity stunt, while others argued it was a genuine act of kindness. But no one could deny the lingering tension in the air, as if something much bigger was on the horizon. Suddenly, Trump re-emerged from the side room, his presence commanding immediate attention. He clapped his hands together, flashing his trademark grin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming over the chatter, "I think it's time we shake things up a little more tonight. What do you say?" The room fell silent, every eye now on him. Trump's grin widened as he stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "Let's just say, the best is yet to come." And just like that, the curiosity that had been simmering all night reached a boiling point. The crowd leaned in, hanging on his every word, desperate to know what he meant. But Trump, ever the master of suspense, simply turned and walked back to the stage, leaving the audience on edge and more intrigued than ever. If you're as curious as the crowd and want to know what happens next, hit that like button and subscribe. The story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. As Trump returned to the stage, the atmosphere in the room shifted again. The tension was palpable, and even those who had grown skeptical of his theatrics earlier were now fully drawn in. He adjusted the microphone, leaning in slightly as his gaze swept across the crowd. "You know," he began, his voice calm but commanding, "a lot of people think I do things just for the show, just for the headlines. And maybe they're right sometimes." A faint chuckle rippled through the audience. "But tonight," he continued, his tone sharpening, "it's not about headlines, it's about people. Real people with real struggles, like Harold Jacobs, sitting right there." He pointed toward the elderly man, who immediately became the center of attention. Harold shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unsure of what to do under the weight of so many eyes. Trump smiled faintly, letting the silence linger for a moment before continuing. "What most of you don't know," he said, is that Harold here isn't just some guy I randomly picked out of the crowd. He's been part of my story for longer than you'd think. The room buzzed with whispers. Even the reporter, who had been furiously scribbling notes all night, froze, her pen hovering over the page. "Wait," she muttered under her breath. "What is he talking about?" Trump held up a hand, silencing the murmurs. "Years ago," he said, his voice steady, "when I was just starting out in business, there was a janitor who worked in one of my first buildings. He wasn't just any janitor. He went above and beyond, keeping things running when no one else cared. He taught me something I never forgot. It's the people behind the scenes who hold everything together." He turned toward Harold, his expression softening. That janitor was Harold Jacobs. The crowd gasped, the revelation hitting like a thunderclap. Harold's eyes widened in shock, his hand clutching the edge of the table as if he might fall over. "Mr. Trump," he stammered, I never thought you even remembered me." Trump stepped down from the stage, walking directly toward Harold. "How could I forget?" he said, his voice firm. "You showed me what hard work and integrity look like, and now it's my turn to repay that debt." The room erupted into applause, but Trump raised a hand, signaling for quiet. "But it's not just about Harold," he said, his tone shifting to something deeper, more serious. "It's about all the Harolds out there. The people who work tirelessly, who go unnoticed, who don't get the recognition they deserve. Tonight, I'm starting a new initiative, a fund dedicated to helping people like Harold, people who've spent their lives giving everything they have, with nothing in return." The applause grew louder, but Trump wasn't finished. "And to kick it off, he added, I'm donating $1 million, because actions, my friends, speak louder than words." The crowd was on its feet now, cheering and clapping. Even the reporter, who had spent most of the night trying to poke holes in Trump's actions, found herself clapping reluctantly. She couldn't deny the power of the moment. Trump turned to the cameras, his smile broad and confident. "So to everyone watching at home," he said, "if you believe in recognizing the unsung heroes in your life, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe, because this is just the beginning. Together, we're going to change lives." The audience roared with approval as Trump stepped back, shaking hands with Harold and Carlos before walking off the stage. The night had started with controversy and doubt, but it ended with a sense of hope and inspiration that no one had expected. And yet, as the crowd slowly dispersed, the reporter couldn't shake a nagging feeling. Something about the way Trump had orchestrated the evening felt too perfect, too deliberate. What was he planning next? The answers, it seemed, were yet to come. Make sure to subscribe for the next chapter, because you won't believe what happens next. As the crowd began to leave the event, there was an air of energy and curiosity that lingered in the room. Harold Jacobs sat quietly at his table, still holding the card Trump had given him, his fingers tracing its edges as though trying to absorb the weight of what had just happened. Carlos, the young waiter, hovered nearby, unable to contain his excitement. "Mr. Jacobs," Carlos said, his voice low but trembling with enthusiasm, "do you realize what just happened? You're the reason everyone is talking right now. You're the reason he made that announcement." Harold looked up, his expression a mix of disbelief and cautious hope. "I don't know, son," he replied, his voice soft. "It feels like a dream. I've spent so many years being invisible, just trying to survive. And now, all of this, it doesn't feel real." Carlos nodded, understanding the sentiment but still unable to suppress his excitement. "You should call that number," he said, motioning to the card. "You should see what this is all about." Harold hesitated, clutching the card tighter. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "I'll call tomorrow." Meanwhile, in a quieter corner of the venue, the reporter who had sparked the night's events wasn't ready to leave. She sat with her laptop open, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she tried to piece together her article. But the more she typed, the more questions seemed to surface. Why had Trump chosen Harold? Was it purely an act of kindness, or was there something deeper at play? She glanced toward the stage, where a few staff members were packing up the equipment. Then her eyes flicked to the side room Trump had disappeared into earlier. She couldn't shake the feeling that the answers she was looking for were just out of reach. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, expecting a message from her editor, but instead found an anonymous text. "If you want the full story, follow Harold." Things aren't what they seem. Her heart skipped a beat as she stared at the screen. Who had sent the message? And what did they mean by, things aren't what they seem? She looked around the room, but no one seemed to be paying attention to her. She quickly packed up her laptop and stood, her mind racing. At the same time, Trump was being ushered out of the venue through a private exit. His expression was calm, almost unreadable, as he stepped into the back seat of a black SUV. His assistant handed him a folder, which he opened casually. Inside were photos of Harold Jacobs, along with a detailed file on his life. Trump scanned the pages, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Everything is in place," his assistant said quietly from the front seat. "The announcement tonight has already gone viral. People are eating it up." Trump closed the folder and leaned back in his seat. "Good," he said, his voice low but firm. "But this is just the beginning. They don't know it yet, but Harold is the key to everything." The SUV pulled away from the venue, leaving behind a city buzzing with questions and speculation. Harold, Carlos, the reporter, none of them knew the full extent of what was unfolding. But one thing was certain: the story wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. If you're curious to see what happens next and want to uncover the secrets behind Trump's plan, don't forget to like and subscribe. The truth is coming, and it's bigger than anyone could have imagined. The next morning, Harold Jacobs sat at his small kitchen table, the card Trump had given him resting in front of him. He had barely slept, the weight of everything that had happened the night before pressing down on him. The world outside his window seemed unchanged, but inside he felt like his life had been turned upside down. With a deep breath, he picked up the phone and dialed the number. The line rang twice before a voice answered, professional and crisp. "Mr. Jacobs," the voice said immediately, as though they had been expecting him. "Thank you for calling. We've been instructed to arrange everything you need. Your life is about to change." Harold's hand trembled as the voice continued, explaining that a trust fund had been set up in his name, enough to ensure he would never have to worry about money again. A new home, medical care, and even a scholarship fund for his grandchildren. Everything was being taken care of. Harold was speechless, tears streaming down his face as he tried to process the information. Meanwhile, Carlos, the young waiter, was scrolling through his phone during a break at work. The night's events had exploded online. Videos of Trump's speech, the moment he revealed Harold's story, and even reactions from people in the crowd had gone viral. Everyone was talking about Harold Jacobs, the janitor who had unknowingly inspired one of the most powerful men in the world. But amidst the praise and admiration, there was another narrative brewing. The reporter, who had been so skeptical the night before, had written a piece questioning the motives behind Trump's actions. Her article detailed a mysterious property deal from decades ago, one that tied Trump's early success to a building where Harold had worked. She suggested that Trump's kindness might have been a way to repay an old debt, or perhaps to silence a secret. The article spread quickly, sparking debates and speculation. Some saw it as a smear campaign, while others believed it added depth to the story. Regardless, the public was captivated. Harold Jacobs had become a symbol of resilience, and Trump's actions had cemented his reputation as a man who could turn critics into believers, at least for now. As Harold stepped out of his apartment later that day, he was greeted by a crowd of reporters and well-wishers. Cameras flashed, and people called out his name, but he just smiled humbly, overwhelmed by the attention. "I don't know why this is happening to me," he said softly to a reporter who managed to get close. "But if my story can help others, then maybe it's all worth it." Across the city, Trump sat in his office, watching the news coverage with a satisfied expression. His assistant entered, carrying a stack of papers. "The response has been overwhelmingly positive," she said. "The initiative is gaining traction, and donations are pouring in." Trump nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Good. People need stories like this. They need hope, something to believe in." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But make sure they never forget who gave it to them." The camera zoomed out as Trump swiveled in his chair, the city skyline visible through the large windows behind him. The story of Harold Jacobs had come to a conclusion, but the ripple effects were just beginning. For Harold, it was a second chance at life. For Trump, it was another calculated move in his endless game of influence and power. And for the world watching, It was a reminder that even the smallest lives could spark the biggest changes. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because every story has another side, and you never know when it will come to light.